Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto awakens Halloween power and become vampire. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Deadly Promise. The soft sounds of someone moaning were carried through the night. Surprised, Naruto lifted his head. He hadn't expected that someone was still at the disco when he was cleaning the bar. Preparing to close after finishing his work, he was tired and less thrilled to have to deal with some drunken teenagers who hadn't realized it was already past 4 in the morning. Leaving the garbage bag at the stairs, he followed the noises, planning to throw them out. The cerulean-eyed man had stepped outside to the backyard where the dumpster stood. It always happened that some unwanted guest would wander outside, or his coworkers would use the place for a quick smoke. The dim-lit place was always a good way to get away for a minute, if the stress became too much, or if you wanted something more romantic than a sweaty and crowded dance floor. The blonde was worn out and tired. He rubbed his hand over his face. Looking down at his body, he spotting his wrinkled and sticky club's uniform. Sighing, he couldn't wait to get home and to finally enjoy a relaxing, hot shower before falling asleep like the dead. It was always hard work when he was working at the disco for some extra cash to financialize his studies. But Naruto enjoyed the work. The people were always interesting to watch and his coworkers friendly. Turning around, he followed the narrow corner, feeling the cold breeze on his exposed skin. He had long ago folded the sleeves of his black, striped shirt up and discharged his apron under the counter, feeling the first winter's cool wind. However, when he moved closer, he was shocked to find his female colleague leaning against the wall. Her green, piercing eyes were closed, and her companion was eagerly sucking at her neck. Awkward looking away, the tanned bartender made a small noise, attracting their attention. Turning back, he watched the two of them. The pink-haired woman was still pressed against the bricks, her eyes slowly fluttering against her own orgasm. However, more surprised was her alleged date. Maybe the pale man hadn't expected someone to find them and instead hoped to remain unknown. Letting a small smile grace his lips, Naruto could only shake his head about his behavior. He could feel the Saint Ranger's dark piercing eyes staring at him, watching him as if measured the situation, waiting for something. However, the blue-eyed man couldn't see what his problem was. Only incidental, he noticed Sakura's red neck and the hickey that grazed her skin, as well as the bloke's red lips. Startled, his blue eyes widened at his discovery, before he groaned annoyed. He could already guess what the two were playing. Oh great, a vampire. However, the smaller one's voice sounded anything but terrified. Instead, the blonde rolled his cerulean blue eyes at them. Seriously, can't you at least wait until Halloween, before dressing up? Dumbfounded, his friend and college stared at him. Shaking his head, the blonde couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. At least he had surprised them before it would have become intense. Oh, hey Naruto. The pink-haired girl interrupted his thoughts. She sounded a little of, maybe too much alcohol, although she would never overdo it when she was working. Raising an eyebrow at her action, he simply urged her to return inside. Don't worry Sakura, I won't tell the boss, just get back inside. Still a little wobbly, the pink-haired girl went back to the club. Her black vest over the white blouse was a little askew, and her skid already crinkled. Turning back to the intruder, he tried to peruse the stranger to leave too. Okay, closing hour. So if you could please just leave. You smell amazing. Unimpressed, the figure had stepped closer to the tanned male. His onyx eyes were glowing dangerous, and his features were a perfect contrast to the stunned blonde. Startled, his victim took a rush step back, pinning him against the wall, his hands resting on either side of his head. Uncomfortable, Naruto stumbled back a few steps, wincing when he felt the cold bricks through the thin fabric. Uneasy, his azure eyes flared open. Suddenly his mouth was dry and his hands sweaty and cold. He hadn't cared enough to observe the stranger before, but when he moved into the soft light of the dim bulb above the door, he could make out defined lines. And gulping, he betrayed his own reasoning. However, the stranger was stunning hot. Midnight, dark black hair, pale skin, and eyes as deep as the moonless night's sky. A handsome face, and what the blonde could make out under the dark blue collar shirt, matched with a pair of perfect-fitting trousers, was an even hot body. trying to wet his lips. His tongue flicked out, feeling the heat grazing his cheeks. Chuckling low, the bloke released his voice, a sexy, baritone sound. Moving closer to him, his breath tickled over the shell of his ear, sending shivers down his spine. So, it would be okay to dress up, if it were Halloween. And dipping down a little, the pale man licked over the hot, sweaty skin of his neck, enjoying the taste of sweet desire. He felt his mouth hurt, but didn't allow his fangs to glide out. Instead he looked back at the beautiful blonde, pleased with his flushed face and clouded eyes. Well, Naruto. Only if you promise to be my beautiful prey for that night. Flashing his eyes, a dim dark red took over the iris. He knew that the tanned bartender had no clue what just happened. Maybe he would believe it to be a reflection of the bad lights, or simply ignore it, for the sake of his sanity. Shaking his head, his counterpart felt like he had just awoken from trance, when he glanced at the stranger. I don't even know your name, so why should I? Playing offended, the fellow didn't move away. Instead his long, beautiful digits caressed over his neck, leaving ghostly goosebumps on the sensitive skin. Startled, Naruto bent into the touch, suppressing a low moaning. It seemed like the gorgeous beauty wasn't completely immune to his charm, but he was certainly something. His clear blue eyes, the way he had smiled at his college, the tingling feeling of his skin left on his own, or the cheerful personality draw him in. Lust was searing through his veins and a hidden desire awakening an inferno of want. Feeling the need to possess the ravishing blonde, to taste the sweet liquid of his blood, he could hardly control his burning hunger. How naive from the tanned male to miss the obvious. However, it would play into his hands. My name's Sasuke. So will you become mine, or do I have to seduce you first? However, he didn't really grant the barkeeper a moment of doubt, and instead pulled the astonished blonde into a fiery kiss. His lips were cold when they clashed on the others, but the burning feeling of their skin contact made up for the cool shiver. Bending his head a little, Naruto wasn't thinking when a teasing tongue licked his bottom lip, demanding for entrance. Eager opening his mouth, he welcomed the mocking intruder in his wet cavity, playing with his own. It tasted like fruits, like strawberries on a summer field, and like spices, like chocolate, and like cognac. Still breathing heavy, the other let go of him again, pleased with the shagged look on his face. Trying to calm himself, Naruto took a deep breath, soothing his hypersensitive nerves. Closing his eyes, he already knew his answer. Surrendering to the prickling heat that still lingered on his skin, the smaller man looked back at his counterpart. I will meet with some friends at a disco called Altus Folium. If you still want to play this stupid game, you can find there. Pleased with his answer, Sasuke leaned in for one last, chaste kiss, before disappearing. Almost unintentionally, his azure blue eyes fluttered shut, before he was suddenly left alone. All Hallows Eve. The music was loud, mixed with ghostly howls from the hidden speakers. Letting his gaze wander through the disco, Naruto soon spotted the familiar pink hair in the back of the club. Crossing the room, he walked over to his friend, happily greeting the small group. Like every Halloween, they had all dressed up for the occasion. He had always been the only one to pass, although they did try to talk him into it. But he told them their costumes were enough. Sakura was dressed as a witch with black lipstick, a laced dress, and the always giveaway of a besom and a hat. Even her nails were painted dark, untypical for her always pink color. And in her hair was a fine web with a spider decorating the net. Shika was lazy, sitting in the corner. Part of his costume hanged from his arms, where the mummy-shaped tissues W wrapped around his wrist, and the remaining of a bandage hanged loose from his skin. Surprised, Naruto wondered where his girlfriend might have vanished to, certain she was the one to talk him into it. Or forcing him, like the always bored genie would say. If you could animate him to talk at least that much. Come on, Naruto, dress up, have fun. His best mate tried to persuade him. I mean, even Hina-chan tried it. He himself was dressed as a ninja, in the traditional shinobi shozoku outfit with a ninjutsu he had carelessly left on the table. Risking one glance at his always shy girlfriend, Naruto was amazed she really had ventured enough courage to come as a cat girl. Well, at least she wore some black ears, attached to a hairband, and a fluffy tail like a belt. However, shaking his head, he blue-eyed man had to deny his request. Sorry buddy, but that's just not my style. He liked his lazy, plain combination of blue jeans and a bright orange t-shirt. Nothing fashionable, nothing extravagant, simply himself. Oh well, maybe next year, the other responded hopefully and handed him one of the beers they had already organized. Thanking him, he took the offered drink, clinking their bottles together. Looking around the little group of friends, Naruto soon found Sakura, debating about the absolute, utterly, most important business of fashion. Winking his friend, he joined the two girls at their discussion. Before facing the green-eyed witch, "By the way, Sakura, do you know someone named Sasuke?" He was curious if the bloke who promised to meet him tonight was an acquaintance of her. But her dumbfounded look was answer enough, without denying it with the shake of her head. However, when her vivid, green eyes sparkled, the tanned man could only hide a small sigh. "Why would you ask, dear? I'm sure I would remember someone with that name, especially if he was hot." She was way too noisy, and although it was always fun for some gossip, it turned sour when it was about oneself. Maybe he never introduced himself to her, or she was already too drunk to remember him telling her his name. "Well, sure, you'd like to know, but that's not happening. That's my date, and if it really goes well, you will be the first one to hear all the dirty secret." He bribed her, knowing she would only leave the topic if he promised her an even better scandal. Rethinking her options, the witch in costume agreed. After all, she could always question him at another chance. "Okay, fair. But at least tell me if he's hot." "He is, isn't he?" Laughing, Naruto just enjoyed her bickering. Closing his eyes, the memories of their little encounter washed over him. Thinking about Sasuke sure was a treat. And yes, he certainly was handsome, he confessed, when a faint blush suffused his cheeks. Giggling, Sakura had watched him. Joyful he had a date tonight. He was her best mate, and after that horrible accident, he had every right to enjoy life. For a second her gaze lingered on the faint marks on his cheeks. Before she scraped that idea, the evening was young and there to be celebrated. They continued the same cheerful atmosphere, until they moved to a larger table, when some more friends joined them. Smiling, Naruto greeted each newcomer the same enthusiastic way, before he continued his talk with Kiba. It was about 2 hours later, maybe closer to 3 hours, when the tanned man excused himself for a moment. His thoughts hadn't returned to Sasuke, not even sure how he would manage to find him in such a mess. Instead, he left for the restrooms, humming to the music in the disco. All Hallows Eve. Watching the enthralled beauty for quite a while now, he had patiently waited for him to be alone. Magically sealing down the restroom, when he entered, the raven knew they would be undisturbed. He had smelled his delicious blood for 2 straight nights, and it was venomously taunting him to taste the delight nectar. Feeling his gum hurt, Sasuke finally surrendered to his desires. Willing his canines to retrace, he scudded closer to the naive blonde. "Ready for me, my beautiful prey?" A deep, amused voice questioned the startled man. He was in the bathroom washing his hands, when someone pulled him into a tight embrace. He felt the bloke's chest pressed against his back, and the man's warm breath, traveling over the shell of his ear. Annoyed, he turned around, feeling the arm over his waist shift. Instead, the drunken idiot placed both hands on either side of his hip, gripping the vanity basin. Whoever believed he was funny, would certainly regret it. "Okay Baka, quit da." But before Naruto could finish his sentence, he felt hot, soft lips on his own. It only took him a second, but he would recognize that face anywhere. So Sasuke had really found him. And wait, he was kissing him. Talking about bold, but the blue-eyed male didn't mind. Instead, his eyes fluttered close, and his free hand slipped to his head, ruffling through his black, silk hair. Again the bronze-skinned man couldn't conceal a moan. And his brain was dangerously close to just stop functioning. Plump lips covered his own, a skilled tongue had used the small gasps to intrude into his wet cavity and sinfully play with his own. Saliva slipped from their kiss, and when the raven pulled back, a wet thread still connected them. Smirking, the stranger leaned closer, whispering seductively into his ear, "Found you, Dobi. So what now, my beauty? I'm starving and you look delicious." Swallowing audible, the smaller one had to hold his breath for a moment. He was still overflowing with euphoria, from just a small kiss. Taking his time, he studied the other for a moment. He was dressed different, with a black frock coat, a white, silk shirt, decorated with an ascot knotted tie and even fucking white gloves. Underneath he wore cashmere striped trousers, and black button boots. Chuckling low, the other draw his attention back to him, leaving Naruto with a faint blush adoring his cheeks. Yes, sorry, I didn't want to. What didn't he want to do? Starring, gawking, goggling. Well, that was harder than it seemed, because the other was stunning. No offense taken, beauty, he smirked, revealing his fangs. Amused, Naruto stared at the extra set of canines, smiling when his eyes flicked over the handsome face. Huh. I'm afraid vampires are already out of season. Seen that about 2 days ago, but maybe you have more luck next year. Playing offended, the pale man snickered at the cheerful human. Lifting his chin with his fingers, he forced the smaller one to look at him. Placing a chaste kiss on his irresistible lips, Sasuke held his surprised gaze. Sparkling red, his priorly dark eyes glowed hungry, a wicked grin grazing his lips. And if I still want you, Naruto? Pauling, his counterpart, stared at him, witnessing his eye color change, and this time it was impossible to blame it on a delusion of bad light. How did you? Suddenly his azure blue eyes darted to his mouth, to the still visible canines. How come he didn't cut himself on the sharp-looking edges? At least he should have felt them when kissing. At that second his mind shut down. He hadn't seen Sasuke in the mirror, when washing his hands. He hadn't thought about it before, but he couldn't look back. Trembling, a pained cry tried to escape his lips, but his throat felt constricted and his pulse was starting to quicken. However, before he could do anything, the raven leaned forward. Panicked Naruto wanted to escape, when Sasuke's gaze amid for his neck, but his fear was paralyzing him. Finally, Dobi, I was surprised how naive you could be, his baritone, husky voice whispered in his ear. I believe you still owe me a promise. And like I said, I'm famished. And when the vampire finally grabbed his arms, he broke his scared stiffness. But it was to no avail. Before Naruto could even try to push the other off of him, his sudden heavy body felt strange and he was pulled into an empty darkness. Rapidly falling into unconscious, Sasuke caught the alluring human and teleported them away. All Hallows Eve. It was only for a few minutes, but his vision was spinning when he sat up too fast. Holding his head, he tried to silence his screaming mind. Naruto felt sick when the memories flashed back within seconds. He couldn't believe he seriously encountered a vampire, a fucking demon who was on top of that playing with him. Fuck, fuck, fuck. The cerulean-eyed male half screamed, half chanted, trying to comprehend what just happened. Looking up, his azure blue eyes were blown with fear and panicked. He tried to get away, only to realize he was in a different place. Whatever had happened, he was in an extravagant bedroom. Frozen in his position, his heart hammering in his chest, was the only sound in the dark chamber. Like an old mansion from the Gothic era, thick curtains blocked the view. Dark, ebony wood paneling decorated the walls, where full bookshelves shaped a sharp contrast embellished with dark red flannel. Above his head a huge chandelier gave of a soft light, illuminated by 100 burning candles. Hastily crawling to his feet, the blond male pushed himself from the four-poster bed, scrambling to the nearest wall. Protectively placing his arms around himself, hugging his shuddering form, his eyes flicked through the room. The decor was expensive, even an open fireplace was installed to the other side. Small tables and chairs, the same dark design like the rest of the room. Darting his eyes, Naruto first hadn't dared to look at the black lounge. He had seen the figure from the corner of his eyes, and frightened he stepped back from him, until he felt the wall in his back. Praying he was just hallucinating, he risked a glance. However, casually waiting for the emotional overwhelmed human to calm down. Sasuke was sitting on the divan. He had gotten rid of the frock coat, and placed his white globes on a small glass table in front of him. Only the silver vest he wore over a white shirt and the cashmere trousers still remembered of his whole outfit. His gaze was unbroken with his guest, before he stood up. His black shoes clattered over the marble floor, and in a heartbeat he was at Naruto's side. You are, Ari," the frightened human stumbled, his hands sweaty and his brain shutting down, when he squinted his eyes. Unnoticed, a small smile darted over Sasuke's pale lips. Moving closer to the still trembling blonde, he placed his hands on his arms, trying to comfort him. Look at me, Naruto. Unable to avoid his demand, the tanned man lifted his gaze, startled at the tender look in his eyes. Too baffled, ignoring his own turmoil for a moment. Moving his hands, Sasuke used the opportunity to cup his cheeks and brushed his tears away. Cracking a small smile, the pale man, relishing in the feeling of skin-to-skin contact, traced the form of his lips with his thumb. "Don't worry, Dobi. I might be a vampire, but I promise you, I won't hurt you. What else do you want, then?" His voice was still fragile, and he felt way too anxious to keep their eye contact. "I thought that was clear," the vampire chuckled. "I want you, Naruto." "What?" Shocked, he snapped his head back and looked up at the other. His fingers were still ghostly stroke over his skin, lovingly caressing his cheeks. His eyes were still red and his fangs visible every time he spoke. "I will feed tonight, Naruto. I won't hide that from you, but it is up to you to make that pleasurable." Shocked azure blue eyes stared at him. He was scared, but so far Sasuke hadn't hurt him. And he had promised him to neither do so. However, he would still feed from him, and that idea made him feel sick again. Could he really trust him to keep his word? Collecting his thoughts, the smaller one could sense his own assurance. Recalling how he had met the vampire, he remembered Sakura, and the scene he had stumbled upon. He was really quite naive, thinking about it afterward. And he felt his own curiosity rise. It wasn't hard to guess that his friend had enjoyed his bite. Opening his eyes, Naruto hadn't realized he had closed them. He was grateful that Sasuke hadn't urged him to make a decision. Instead, the black-eyed man took his hands in his own, encouraging, stroking over his knuckles. Sighing, the bronze-skinned human looked at the other, questioning his own bravery. His voice was firm and demanding, sounding more secure than he felt. "Show me. All Hallows Eve. Pulling his lover back to the bed, Sasuke guided the blonde to sit down on the edge. Kneeling in front of the human, his red eyes tenderly gazed at him, savoring every expression and every silent sound. The blonde was slightly trembling, whimpering a little as if he was trying too hard to remain still. Easing his tensions, the raven's hand remained on his back, soothingly massaging in small circles. Smiling encouraging, he leaned closer to the smaller one, brushing him with a simple touch. Kissing him again, he took his time to explore. First a soft peck over trembling lips, he pulled away immediately, before repeating the same process. Every time he would hold the kiss a little longer. Simultaneously his hands would caress his arms, chest and stomach, never really leaving him without some contact. Only when the taller one felt the blue-eyed man calming, one hand moved behind his neck. Tugging at his hair, he pushed his head back, intensifying their kiss. Allowing his lips to linger longer on the others, his tongue lapped over his bottom lip, stimulating a small moaning from the blonde, when his tongue pressed against the closed mouth. Maybe he had told the vampire to show him what would happen, but that didn't mean he wasn't afraid anymore. Naruto couldn't control the slightly trembling of his body, when Sasuke had led him to the bed. The mattress had sagged a little, when he sat on the soft fabric. Curiously awaiting what the black-haired man would do next, his eyes followed his every move. Instead, the raven kneeled before him, cupping his cheeks, while leaning in for a gentle kiss. Only grazing his lips, the bronze-skinned human felt lightheaded at the simple touches. He hadn't realized the hands, always caressing him. Instead, he sensed the lingering feeling on his lips. With every kiss his needs became stronger. Unconsciously pushing back, when he felt the other drawing away, slowly arousing his lover. It didn't take long for the innocent blonde to feel the rising need to be touched. It soon wasn't enough to just feel chaste kisses pressed against his lips, instead he began to feel hot. Breathing heavy, his eyes clouded with lust, and when the raven teasingly asked for entrance, he eagerly parted his lips. Moaning aloud, the feeling of their tongues was electrifying. However, the feeling was way too short. When Sasuke pulled back unexpected. Instead, he took his bottom lip between his teeth, nibbling at the plump, delicious flesh. Flashing wickedly, his eyes flared open, the vampy re-secured his right hand behind his head, tucked at his silky, blonde hair. Allowing his fangs to glide out, he bit down, drawing some mere drops of blood, before releasing the panting man. It tasted heavenly, like nothing he had ever tried. Rich, like a faint unique liquid, spilled with strawberries and pepper. Sweet and spice, like his lips, the sweat on his skin, or the taste of his mouth. Strong, gier than any human he had ever engaged before, and Sasuke was certain that he would never find it again either. Overwhelmed, Naruto groaned at the orgasm hitting him full force. He had already guessed it to be fantastic. But this was even more than he had expected. It was a burning, hot, and searing pain that traveling from his lips through his body and to his abdomen. Gripping his broad shoulders, he tried to smooth his raging breath. Before he could look back at the other, amused, sparkling eyes watched the distraught human, and a sneaking smile grazed pale, soft lips. Absent-minded, the blue-eyed man licked over his own. Felt the slightly stinging, when he lapped the small wounds. Leaning closer, he carefully covered his with soft kisses on his lips, his cheeks, and moved to his ears, reassuringly murmuring that everything would be all right. But Naruto had long forgotten his insecurity. Instead, he felt a hot, needing fire every time those sinful lips brushed him, touched him, burned him. Pressing one lingering kiss right under his ear, over the pulse mark of his vein, he didn't bit down. Instead, he started to suck on the skin, leaving it red and bruised. Groaning desperate, the blonde clutched to his shoulders, trying to compose himself, when another shot of pleasure seared through his body. Crying out loud, he couldn't hold his voice back, when he called for the black-haired male, saw Sasuke. Snapping his head back, Naruto squinted his eyes shut, surprised about his own aroused voice. Using the moment, cold hands slipped under his bright orange shirt, and a snickering sound escaped pale lips as they stripped the flushed blonde of this cloth, freeing his firm, lithe body. He had done some martial arts when he was younger, and still went to the gym if he had time. It was enough for him to know he was good-looking, although it wasn't quite enough for a six-pack. Suddenly he felt the soft bed moving, when the vampire pushed him into the mattress, crawling over him, and pulling him with him. Fastening his mouth again to his neck, he eagerly sucked at the already swollen and red flesh, earning himself more delicious groans. Sasuke felt his own arousal growing, his need to possess sweeping into his actions. "You have no idea what you do to me, the way your lustful screams make me want to simple take you," his husky voice whispered, darting his tongue over the shell of his ear, and lapping over the sweet taste of his skin. Squirming and burning, the blue-eyed man felt lightheaded. He wasn't sure if it was simple the feeling of lust, the euphoria that rushed through his body, or if it was still the sensation of his bite, but he didn't care anymore. He was burning, trembling hot, and if Sasuke wouldn't do something soon he would melt. Looking straight at his eyes, he could see them clouded with lust, and begging for some kind of release. "I'm going to make you feel so good. You want that, Naruto, don't you?" Patient was never something the blonde could claim to have mastered. Instead, he pulled the pale male closer to him, gripped his silver vest, and crashed their lips together. The kiss was sloppy, and panting heavy. The blue-eyed human couldn't manage to keep his desperate cry going. "Please, Sasuke, please, NGH, something, do something." His skin was burning, searing, and the cold hands on his body didn't make it any better. On the contrary, it was like they were fuel to the already raging fire, intensifying every touch, every lick, or every bite. Clutching the edge of his vest, his fingers dug into the silken material. Panting, the blonde-haired man yanked at his lover, trying to get the garment off of him. Cloth, too much cloth. Pressing their bodies together, their erections tauntingly rubbed against each other. Sitting up, only their abdomens were connected, and the vampire grounded into the other. Getting rid of his vest, his fingers were fast when they tore open his shirt and stripped the material from his shoulder. Pulling the beautiful human closer, he grabbed his hands and pressed them against his firm body. Moving blindly, Naruto blinked, dazed, feeling cool skin under his finger and a defined chest. He was a whimpering mess, not capable of thinking. But that didn't matter. He could sense the heat that swept through his fingers, the muscles that clenched under his touch. Slowly feeling his surroundings again, his bright blue eyes stared at blood-red eyes. They weren't as clouded as before, however they were still wide and blown. Roaming over his body, he couldn't deny that the other was drooling hot. Firm, defined muscles grazed his body, beautiful formed abs, and a lithe body to make anyone jealous. Wah, what was that? His voice was still strained, but he could think a little bit clearer. Chuckling deeply, the black-eyed male drew his attention to him. Placing 2 fingers under his chin, he lifting his head, staring directly into his azure blue eyes. Smirking wickedly, Sasuke placed one long, lingering kiss on his lips. Savoring the taste of spices and sweets. I told you I could make that pleasurable for you, and leaning down his fangs grazed over his neck. However, he didn't allow the stunned beauty to comprehend what that meant. Before he sank his teeth into the soft flesh. Gasping shocked, the smaller one couldn't even react, when a new wave of lust hit him and he was writhing on the sheets once again. This time it did not only went straight to his groins, he was certain he even came in his pants. Euphoria, lust, want, need all washed through him, melted into him, and wouldn't let him go. Panting heavy, the blue-eyed human closed his eyes, overflown with sensations. That's cheating, Tem. Smirking, the vampire released his canines, lapping at the small flow of blood. But you like it anyway. You know you taste addicting, Dobby. I can't seem to get enough of you. Placing sloppy kisses on his lips, Naruto pulled himself closer to his lover, hooked his fingers into the hem of his trousers. Begging, his tongue found Sasuke's, eagerly kissing him back. Please fuck me. I want you to come in me. Feeling bold, little one, the pale man teased him, but he obediently pushed him back into the mattress. Attacking his jeans, his digits only fumbled with his button for a few seconds, before he yanked the trousers down. Whimpering and moaning, the tanned male could only catch a sharp breath. When his penis was finally free, your fault, all your fault, he. Then it's my obligation to help you, the taller one retorted. His whole abdomen was hurting, and his penis was throbbing painfully, but the other one maliciously ignored his needs. Instead, his tongue swept over his inner thigh, softly biting the firm flesh, until it turned red. Panting between nips and licks, he remembered the blonde who was in control. Feeding his need to possess the alluring human. You are mine, Naruto, your taste, your scent, your blood, all mine. Sass. More Sasuke, Naruto begged, uncertain if his voice was still audible. Chuckling, his partner released his burning thighs, hungry eyes trained on his boxers. He could smell the arousal, the bittersweet taste of salt hanging in the air. Using the moment of distract, he summoned the small tube of lube that he kept stored in the nightstand into his hand. Poor little baby, how could I? He teased over his clothed penis. Hawking his fingers into the hem of his underwear, he pulled the troublesome fabric off, discharging it like his trousers and socks into one of the corners. Nestling himself between his spread legs, he placed his prey in the middle of the bed. Finally, the beautiful human was before him. Cerulean blue eyes, blown wide with lust, and clouded by pleasure. Willingly ready, dripping wet and deliciously eager just for his touch. It was worth the 2 days he had waited to claim his price, to have withheld his needs when he first met Naruto in the backyard. This enchanted being was far too precious to be carelessly misused, to only be tasted once. Just so someone else would snatch him away. Swirling his tongue around the shaft, he ever so slowly started sucking it. Teasingly pressing his wet organ on the salty slit, and drinking its delicious constant. Pulling back his head, he still kept the tip in his mouth, before he popped down again. It was torture, repeating malicious slow, when his teeth scraped the hot flesh. It was pleasure and pain, writhing into one touch, when one of his fingers caressed over his butt cheeks. Playing with his crack, he didn't push in yet, just lingered over the sweet heat. With a loud cry, Naruto came undone. The agony of searing pains, the pressure of need and want, and lust all melted into his scream. Getting up again, Sasuke got rid of his own trousers. He had already kicked off his shoes when he sat on the bed, but with a swift move he unbuckled his pants and stripped them off too. Curiously lifting his head, the blonde human looked up, stifling a surprised groan. Then he realized the black-haired man didn't wear any boxers. Moaning into the touch, Naruto bent to feel more of his lover, to melt into his heat. Grinding their erections, the vampire pressed their bodies together. Unscrewing the tube, his pale fingers squeezed the clear lube out of its container, smearing it on his digits. Caressing his tights, he followed the line of his butt cheeks to his entrance. Before he pressed one finger against his crack, sinking into the eager heat, he slipped through the tight muscle ring, pressing forward. Surprised, a pained moan escaped Naruto's lips, and unwillingly he tensed his hold on the others. Blunt nails scraped over pale skin, dug into his shoulders. "Shish, it's okay baby, just relax," his partner whispered into his ear. Trying to loosen up again, the blue-eyed human only gave a small nod. Before he tensed up again. It wasn't that easy to just calm down. When the raven pulled him closer to himself, he felt a hand between their cooks pressing them together. Gasping surprised, Naruto released his hold on his finger enough for the black-eyed male to slip a second digit inside. Simultaneously moving both against each other, and scissoring his entrance, a guttural scream escaped his throat. When they brushed over his sensitive spot, kissing alongside his neck, Sasuke sneakered into the touch, found it. He whispered half-conscious, before returning to his discovery. Pressing down on the same spot, he earned himself a lovely scream. Pushing deeper into his delicious human, he still whispered reassuring words in his ears, quenching in the soft sounds of pleasure and pain. It hurt like hell, but Naruto tried to steel himself. It wasn't like he was completely innocent, but he couldn't say he had many experiences either. And even if he would have, it had never felt like this. It was intense, painful, but also beautiful. Although he had no clue what Sasuke was whispering, he knew the vampire was trying to comfort him. Steady breathing, the blonde human tried to calm himself. When another finger was inserted, scratching deep red marks on the pale skin, he gripped tightly to the vampire. Although it wasn't pleasant, it slowly became tolerable. Especially every time those sinful digits brushed over his sweet spot. Scissoring and stretching his whole, Sasuke never neglected the rest of this body, biting and licking along his torso. He made Su press their bodies tightly together, tenderly caressing his beautiful prey, making sure to never neglect any of his desires. Pleased with his wanton screams and his willing trusts. When he felt the blonde pressing down on his fingers, he withdrew them again, only to slam them back into the abused hole, stretching the muscle ring further. Shifting and groaning, the blue-eyed human felt how his resistance slowly crumbled. How he began to enjoy the pain that constantly turned into pleasure. "Ready, love?" the pale man questioned his partner, his voice huskily and rough. However, he didn't wait for an actual answer. Instead, he slipped his digits out of his buttocks. Pleased when he heard the other whimper at the loss. Fingering with the tube, he pressed a generous amount of gel into his free hand, stroking his painful and hard penis. Locking his eyes with Naruto's, Sasuke marveled at the stunning beauty. His cheeks were flushed and he had that special glowing that made his bronze skin look luminescent. Leaning down, the vampire could read so much in those sapphire blue eyes, and allowing himself a small smile, he placed a chaste kiss on his bruised lips. Unwittingly, the blonde human could only take a deep breath, trying to steady him for what would come. Giving a short nod, he signed the older one he was ready. Not waiting any longer, it was all Sasuke needed to continue. Aliening his leaking penis with his entrance, he pushed inside, groaning when the hot heat engulfed his prick. Gasping surprised, Naruto still needed a second to calm down again. Shocked, his eyes widened, his pupils dilated, and his fingers clawing Sasuke's shoulder, digging his nail into soft flesh. With numb fingers, he pulled his lover closer to him, trying to find some kind of support. Screaming a silent cry into the raven's haired shoulder, his other digits dug into the bed sheet, denying the blonde his right to scream, to cry out the uncomfortable feeling of being filled. Smiling into the touch, his eyes glittered mischievous, sucking slow on the other's tongue. Waiting patiently, the vampire burrowed himself deep in his ass, his balls touching his cheeks, before he stilled. It was a strange sensation for the blonde. Pleasure and pain flowing together, blending into each other and merging. He wanted to scream, but his lips were sealed and defeated. He squinted his eyes, hoping for the burning to lessen soon. Feeling the other relaxing, the dark-haired male broke their kiss. Studying the other, his cold hands caressed his cheeks, whipped away the few tears that threatened to be spilled. It was in that moment Sasuke knew the blonde was everything he ever wanted, ever needed. Placing a chaste kiss on Naruto's forehead, he pulled the blue-eyed human closer. Watching the perfect figure above him, the face carved out of marble, the younger one felt like never before, like a feeling of longing that was finally fulfilled. And the words that lingered on his lips were instead swallowed by another moan. The vampire had pulled away, not enough to slip out, but to only leave his tip inside, before slamming back again. "Be baka," his lover cried hoarsely, earning him a faint chuckle. "Nai, stay with me, Naruto." The vampire's husky voice moaned, becoming mi for all at eternity, ah. Nani. Dumbfounded, the blonde stared back at the pale man. "Ag, like you. That would be the ECA, ag, catch. Become mine. NGG, mine to love, mine to care, mine to protect. Become my mate," his partner replied. He had wanted the alluring human since he had first smelled him, since he had cheekily spoken with him. "Why me?" The tanned man breathed exhausted. "You were cheeky when we first met." "I like that," the man simple replied. Pushing back into the tight body, he let his words flow freely. "And when we find something we like, we keep it." "Funny. You were quite an arrogant git when we first met," the blonde responded, "but I liked that too, aggh." And then he pulled the other back to him. Resuming their kiss again, letting his hand rest on Sasuke's cheek, he could directly stare into his black eyes, illuminated by a red glim. He could see everything in his dark orbs: need, desire, trust, blood, and most of all love. And he knew his own eyes were the same. He felt the same need, the same desire for his touch, to taste his blood on his own lips, and the trust that this love was real. Leaning his head to the right, he stretched his neck, showing the other his unmarked side, the thick aorta, throbbing just under the skin. "Do it, Sasuke. Bite me, make me yours." He screamed against a new wave of euphoria that went through his whole body. Licking his lips, Sasuke released his fangs, before he lashed his mouth onto the juncture between his neck and shoulder. Growling deeply, he gave the skin one last lick, before finally sinking his canines into the offered flesh. Blood popped from the vein, when he tore through it, moving his fangs out a little, to enjoy the sweet, intoxicating taste of his ambrosia splashing on his tongue. Shocked, Naruto's clear blue eyes flashed open. He knew it to hurt like hell, but it also felt divine. It was pleasure and pain, melting, mixing, emerging within him. He wanted to scream. Instead, when he really managed to release a sound, it was a pained moaning. But he was only allowed some mere strokes before a quick hand slapped his away. Growling dangerous, the vampire set up a little, only to fasten his bite around the wound. Having a better position than before, he slammed fully back into the writhing blonde. Crying desperate, Naruto was a mess. His last bit of free will just snapped, and arching his back into the mattress he met with his partner's quickened thrusts. He was blabbing, no longer possible to form a coherent thought. When little sparkles danced before his eyes. He was growing heavy, however, his body was still aroused, still alive, and although he couldn't move much, he arched his back. Bending, he allowed his lover to have a better position, to hit straight point at his prostate. Squirming his blown blue eyes shut, he finally came. His arms tightly secured around his lover's form, scratching his back, when he screamed his name. Feeling his orgasm breaking. All Hallows Eve. Panting heavy, both males were drained, one more than other. Blood had coated the sheets, when Sasuke had moved them. Smudging his lips, his tongue licked over the addicting liquid. This time he didn't bite him to eat, but to kill. It would be the same outcome, only more violently. Dripping from the tore wound, he had ripped through the flesh, gorging on his beloved's delicious liquid. Releasing his neck, he pulled his teeth from the bite, lapping at the slow flow. The vampire had drunken almost all the blood, only leaving a pity remain. It would be enough to allow the body to function for some mere minutes, but it was deadly in the end. Briefly pressing his lips to Naruto's cool ones, he knew he wouldn't have much time left. His body was stiff, cold, and his color was slowly leaving his face. His arms had fallen limp to his side, and his breathing became faint. His always beautiful blue eyes were dull and livid. Desperately trying to see something, they fluttered open, but the soft candlelight only hurt him, and he squinted them with a pained look. It was torture to see his beloved so bitterly fighting. Whispering reassuring, his free hand caressed his damp hair, pressing a lingering kiss against his temples. Speaking low, he hoped to calm this beautiful being in his arms. "Shush, dear. It's okay." They were still connected at their hips, but the black-eyed vampire somehow managed to sit up enough to stable his position, without slipping out. Bringing his arm to his mouth, he released his fangs again with a growl. plunging them into the vein on his wrist. Tearing away, he ripped a deep wound into the flesh. Moving closer, he pressed his open sword to his slack lips, while stretching his head to help his chosen to swallow easier. Drink, love. It will be over soon. At first his blood only trickled over his half-closed lips, and down his throat. But after a painful long moment he felt hands grabbing his wrist. And warmth filing his skin. Steady growing stronger, the blonde had started sucking at the wound, drinking the alluring liquid. Although he didn't quite understand it, he knew he wanted more of that delicious ambrosia. Lovingly caressing him, his thumb tenderly fondled his cheeks and glided his fingers through his blonde hair. It wasn't necessary to allow Naruto to drink that much. But he knew the blue-eyed male would need all the extra energy he could get. On top of that, it would soothe his burning pain, that was sure to follow when his poison would kill his mortality. The changes wouldn't happen immediately. Instead, Naruto would feel sleepy and extremely thirsty over the next few days, until his body would feel reassured enough to fall into a comfortable pattern. However, when his lovely mate casted open his eyes, Sasuke could only marvel at his beautiful color. Winding streaks of red filled his once blue eyes, growing stronger and brighter with every drop the blonde drank. Showing the poison of his blood, working its magic through his body, the vampire waited for another gulp before he forcefully pulled his arm away. Little surprised about the short burning, when he teared his wrist away. He felt blunt nails trying to clutch to it. Instead, he pulled the confused male into his embrace, whispering reassuring words into his ears. "Hush, love. Everything's all right." Moving again, the pale man finally slipped out of him, before rearranging both on the vast bed. Using his magic, he had unbeknown changes not only the bed with clean sheets, but also performed a cleaning charm on both of them. Pulling the other closer to himself, he placed the blonde on his chest, warping his arm protectively around his slim body. Watching his chosen, he felt his own fire slowly subsiding, shifting his thought to the beautiful creature in his arms. Naruto was still weak when his eyes flattered open again, but the biggest shock seemed to be over. Steady, the raven could listen to his heartbeat slowing down, and when he glanced into his eyes, they were blue once again. Carefully moving, the bronze-skinned male crawled closer to his partner, merely feeling a little tired. Looking back at the other, he was surprised at how unrealistic everything seemed. "You will stay with me, right?" A little startled about his own voice, the blonde couldn't believe how secure he felt. Ashing his eyes, his counterpart started back at his lover, slightly amused about what exactly could actually concern him. Instead of questioning his own sanity, or freaking out about his destiny, he was more worried about something trivial like their relationship. As if he even could leave the cheerful blonde alone. He might not have realized it yet, but he was unconditional, fatally attracted to him. Chuckling, the dark-haired vampire smiled softly at him, before he leaned in and kissed his forehead. "Sure. Always, Dobi. Say, Sasuke." The blonde turned around, lying on his side, while his head rested on his chest. "Sakura won't remember what happened, would she? I mean, I asked her about you, but she seemed pretty dumbfounded." Smirking, the older one placed a soft kiss on his ruffled hairs. Before he pulled his mate closer into his embrace. "Don't worry, Dobi. I erased her memory, she won't remember anything." Supporting himself on his arms, Naruto pulled himself up a little, watching his lover insecure. "Would you have done the same with me, if I had said no?" Darkening, his eyes filled with knowledge, as he knew perfectly what his mate meant. "Sorry to disappoint you, but no. Like I already told you, you are just too precious." And lulling his chosen one to sleep, he lovingly played with his silken blonde hair, before the older one pulled the bronze-skinned male back into his embrace. "You were the exception, Naruto. I would have simply tried again to seduce you again. Then lucky you I didn't need much of persuasion." The blue-eyed man smiled, pressing his face into the crook of his lover's neck. Still speaking into his hug, the newly turned vampire felt how he was increased growing tireder. "This magic of yours, how do you do that? Can I learn that too?" "Sure. You will learn everything. It will come naturally. Your body will tell you. You will know how to hunt, how much blood to take, and how to use magic," his lover assured him. Although he was a born vampire, Naruto's wasn't the first transformation he had witnessed. He knew what to expect from a newly turned vampire, and he would guide his eternal companion through every step. Suppressing a stifled yawn, trying to fight his tiredness off, he furrowed one of his brow. Does it have to be human blood? Truthfully answering his question, Sasuke knew there was no reason to beat around the bushes. He believed that it would be vain anyway to try and deny the truth, especially if his partner had already accepted his blood. Yes, animal's blood would only work for a while, it's not nutritious enough, and vampire blood is too thin. The only pleasure it would ever have is between mates, because it tastes divine, but doesn't sustain us. Doesn't bother me, Tem. Just don't bite any of my friends anymore, his mate yawned again. Cuddling closer to his lover to sleep in his arms. Pulling the newly turned vampire into a loving embrace, he covered them both with the blanket. Just sleep, Dobby, the change will require you a lot of energy. It was just as he had told him. His body would instinctively accept his needs, and the rush of blood would pulse trough his veins. He would simply slip into his new life, embracing everything it would offer. All Hallows Eve 1 year later. Yo Naruto, Sasuke, over here. The voice of his best friend reached to his ears. Smiling, the blonde grabbed his boyfriend's hand and dragged the pale man to a small group of people standing near the bar. Greeting everyone with an overenthusiastic hug, the blue-eyed male pulled back again, only to inspect their costumes. I see, you finally decided to dress up for Halloween too, Kiba mocked the blonde, already studying the surprised changes. Why not? Sasuke talked me into it, the addressed one counted back. And when a pale arm wrapped around his waist, he leaned into the embrace. Nuzzling his neck, his beloved only half whisper into his ear for everyone to hear them, and you look sexy in that outfit. Blushing slightly, Naruto could feel the heat filling his cheeks, before he looked back at his buddy, seeing the smirk on his face, knowing they had all heard what Sasuke had said to him. Sighing, he could only smile about his lover. After all, he did love their little teasing, feeling satisfyingly pleased when his lover's attention was only on him. However, it didn't hurt to catch some extra compliment, and what do you think? Nice try, but Sasuke's scary, when he's all possessive, the dog lover cautiously replied. He was dressed as a werewolf, showing off 2 sets of fangs, and attached hair to his face. Inspecting the couple, he sometimes still wondered about the chemistry of this crazy pair, but it must have been love at first sight. After all, they always say opposites attract each other. Although he could never really figure out the raven completely. But it was clear these two belonged together, just by watching how head over heels in love they were. They simple trusted each other blindly. But I'm impressed. I never expected you to turn up as a vampire. Truth spoken, the cheerful male was dressed in a long, white shirt, hidden under a dark blue and golden just core, where only the ruffled, laced jabot was visible. Matching the beautiful knee-long coat, he also wore black, ankle-long breeches as trousers and half-opened shoes. Next to him, Sasuke was wearing some similar garnish. Only his was black and golden. But it's what comes natural, the blonde smirked, flashing his fangs. For a brief moment there was something darker, alien sparkling mischievously in his deep blue eyes. Unintentionally, Kiba felt a shiver running down his spine, irritated as if he had just glimpsed the truth of something that was dangerous and surreal. However, the moment was over, before the brown-haired male could even grape it. And the thought had already vanished. Instead, he watched as the energetic blonde pulled his lover over to the dance floor, as hyperactive as always and as cheerful as he knew him. Smiling sly, the spoken one had felt the irritation in his best friend, but he strangely didn't found it in him to feel guilty for it. He just felt relaxed that the dressed-up werewolf had already discharged the thought. Instead, he winked at him, chuckling at his stupid look, before he dragged his eternal companion with him. Drawing his mate closer to him, breathing in his scent and the warmth of his body. As if it would comfort him, when there was no need to feel agile. For a moment Naruto's eyes turned blood red, gazing only at his raven-haired partner. Moving closer, he led the taller one into a loving embrace. You know, maybe I should go looking what might be outside at the back door. Smirking, the black-eyed vampire leaned closer, letting his own fangs glide out. When he teasingly nibbled at his lover's lips, why Dobby? Already eager again. Let us feed first, then we return to your friends, before they become too suspicious. And if you really insist, we can later still return to the manor. After all, this night is ours." Slapping the pale man on his shoulder, the blue-eyed male hadn't missed the mocking glint in his eyes. Moving his arm around his neck, the bronze-skinned man pulled the other closer to him, kissing him desperately. "Yours, only yours, Tem. Love you so much." Naruto half moaned into the kiss. "You too, Dobi. I'm yours, for all eternity," Sasuke whispered at his ears. After he broke their kiss, instead he attached his lips to the juncture of his neck, licking over the hot flesh, before sucking at the soft, delicious skin. Pressing down his fangs, directly over his claiming mark, he could taste blood, wetting his tongue, before he pulled back, licking over the few droplets of rich ambrosia. "Although you still taste the best." They had shared blood before, something only mates would do, and their love had sung in their veins, binding them together for all eternity. Kissing again, the two vampires didn't mind that they were in a club full of humans, where everyone could see them. It was Halloween, and no one would care to look twice. Unleashing his own canines, the azure-eyed man bit down on his lover's bottom lip, drawing some of the same delicious poison. "You too," he mumbled, before proper attacking his neck. Enjoying the feeling of intimacy, Sasuke fondly played with Naruto's blonde hair, before he softly whispered into his ear, "Love you too, my little mate." The end. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.